notion is that, I mean, if feminism is the concept of liberating rights for both women and men, right, and not negating one or the other, then how can Islam not be considered a religion that promoted that concept right from its, initial revelations, right? I mean, the seventh, chapter to be revealed, right, states وَإِذَا الْمَوْءُودَةُ سُئِلَتْ بِأَيِّ ذَنبٍ قُتِلَتْ, right? And by seventh, I don't mean like chronological order. I mean like in terms of the revelation order. That the female infant, right, will ask for what sin was it buried alive, right? So when Sumayya radiallahu anha hears this, right, from her son, who comes to her, Ammar, and says, this is what the Prophet is sharing with us, right? Because she's fearful that her son is, going with the Prophet, peace be upon him, and she, obviously as a mother, she wanted to protect him. So, from its very beginning, right, the idea was to liberate women and to liberate, all of those who are being subjugated. I mean, that would be my argument, that this, I mean, I don't see it any other way, in terms of the overall concept at least.
I mean, I would, if we think about feminism as, let's say, an attempt by women to try to address the systematic discrimination against them in a society, then I won't get into whether or not, Islam has liberated women or not. I mean, this is, I don't know how to evaluate that. But for example, if you have societies, like most societies are patriarchal, and many pre-modern societies, I think, were severely patriarchal, and certainly many Mediterranean, almost all Mediterranean and sort of Middle Eastern societies were extremely patriarchal. The system of Islamic law and the Sharia courts were often actually one of the ways that women had available to them to escape or overcome the patriarchy in that society. So you had instances, I mean, we know from archives of Ottoman Sharia courts from the 1700s and 1800s that women in towns and villages were regularly going to the Sharia courts to make their husbands give them their maintenance, to make their husbands pay them their dowries if they were getting divorced. There was this one case of a slave woman, actually. She was a slave, a Circassian slave woman in the 1700s in Cairo, who her master, she had borne a child through her master, and when you do that, if you're a slave woman, you can't be sold, and when your child is free, and when your master dies, you become free. And the master wasn't giving her these guarantees, so she basically went to the Slave Traders Guild and said, "This is happening to me." And they all went to the Sharia court judge and got the judge to demand that the husband give her the appropriate rights. So I mean, from our knowledge of what actually happened in Sharia courts in the pre-modern period, and until today, in places like Egypt, in places like Iran, there's actually a really good book called, I can't remember what it's called, it's by Arzu Hassan Lu, it's from Stanford University Press, on politics of piety, and I can't remember, it's about Iran. And it's actually all about the way that women in Iran are using the legal system in Iran, which is, of course, sort of an interesting amalgamation of pre-revolutionary Persian justice system and sort of a new Sharia justice system. They're actually using the courts to try and improve and get the rights that women have guaranteed to them by the Sharia law in Iran.
This next question is again for Dr. Brown. How does a Muslim allay the fears of those afraid of Sharia law in the U.S. and kind of alongside that is how does Sharia exist along U.S. law?
I still don't understand this fear of Sharia. I mean, does anyone ever sit around and wake up and I'm going to wake up and Sharia law is going to govern America? I mean, Muslims are, anywhere from, I think it's around 2.5 to 3 million, although there's been a recent study, I think Isan Bagby in Kentucky said it's more like 6 million. I mean, there's maximum 6 million Muslims in America. How the heck are they going to implement Sharia law? I don't understand. They is some Muslim going to go into Congress and like take all the congressmen hostage and say, you are going to pass a law to make Sharia law the law of the land? I don't understand how this can possibly happen, and how anybody who is really sitting and thinking sensibly about anything could really think that there's a threat that Sharia law is going to take over America. In addition to which, as I explained, I hope clearly, what Sharia law is infinitely debatable. I mean, first Muslims would have to sit around and decide what that Sharia law was going to be. And then, you know, that would probably take a little while. And then they would have to somehow, despite being an extreme minority in this country, and by the way, not really wanting Sharia law themselves in this country, would have to then implement it throughout the entire country. So I think that the fear is so irrational. I would just ask the person, how on earth would that happen? I mean, let's just assume that Muslims in America want this. How on earth would they make this happen? It's so unbelievably bizarre that someone would be afraid of this. I don't know. I would simply throw their question back at them and ask them to explain how they can have this bizarre fear. The second question is, when people talk about Sharia law in America, what are they talking about? They say, oh, American courts are using Sharia law. What do they mean? Well, first of all, if an American citizen or an American company engages with in a transaction with this individual or company in a country like, let's say, Bahrain or Saudi Arabia or Egypt or a place like that, or Malaysia, a country that has some Sharia law dimensions, or let's say with an Islamic bank or something like that in Qatar, then part of that transaction and that agreement is going to be regulated by the law of that country. And if the American court is having to, let's say, implement or carry out a part of that agreement here, they are necessarily going to be carrying out an article of Sharia law. And that's how it would work with any foreign law. So foreign law, I mean, American courts have to accept the validity of foreign law sometimes, because otherwise, how do you deal with interaction between Americans and foreign legal entities? So actually, the group that is supposedly against Sharia law, they were getting called racist or something like that, so they changed it, so we're against any foreign law. I think you can look this up and find out about this group, the one that was, I think, in Tennessee. Now, this whole, now their efforts are completely sunk. They torpedoed their own efforts, because if you go and start telling an American judge or a lawyer, you know, bar association, that we can't have any interaction with foreign law, you're going to be laughed out of the building. It's just ridiculous. So when people talk about, you know, that's one way in which Sharia law might influence America and have some role in American law. The second one is through things like marriage, right? So when we go to get married, you know, you usually, if you want to go to the mosque, at least where I live, you can't actually get the Sharia marriage until you show the imam the marriage certificate from the state, in my case, state of Virginia. And they're not going to talk to you until you do that. But then you have a Sharia contract, marriage contract, and you stipulate, you know, what are the different things that my wife and I stipulate? I don't know. It's all very good, I'm sure. So that is Sharia law. And to the extent that I wrote this contract with my wife, if my wife says, you know, Jonathan, he's a really terrible husband, and I had it with him, and he doesn't do any of the things he said he was going to do, I'm going to go to court and I want a divorce, and I want X amount of alimony, and I want to take, you know, this and that, and he has to pay me this much, because look at these things he said he was going to do, and he hasn't done these things. The judge can then decide, am I going to treat this thing they wrote as a legal document, which he may well do. And in fact, my, probably not a good sign, my father-in-law was in Florida, actually led an effort to make I went all the way up to Florida Supreme Court to make the Florida Supreme Court force the husband to pay the dowry of his wife. So that's my father-in-law. So that's what I have to be very careful about keeping him happy. So that's a situation in which the American legal system was used to make one Muslim fulfill their promise they made to another Muslim. Now, there's also another side to this, which is that courts have a huge backlog, especially with reduction in public funding. They're moving slower than ever. So if you're a judge in a court, let's say in the state of Virginia where I got married, the judge won't even, if you're a Muslim, he won't even deal with your court, with your case, until you've gone to the imam of the mosque, and gotten marriage counseling. They say, listen, we really don't want to deal with you. Please, for God's sake, go to the mosque, do your Sharia thing, please figure it out. Then come back to us, maybe we'll do the divorce. So the American legal system also wants to use the Sharia, because they want Muslims to have ways of figuring out problems that's not going to tax the resources of the judicial system.
Jazakumullah khairan for both of our speakers. I'm going to ask one last quick question. Dr. Brown, can you suggest any good books for further reading about Sharia?
There's this book that just came out. I haven't read it, but what?
Heaven on Earth.
Did you read it?
I just got it signed by Ustadah we invited, do you know Ustadah?
No, I heard him on the radio.
Oh,
but,
on NPR?
Yeah, it sounds like a really good book. I didn't read it.
Yeah, well, actually, he was here 2 days ago, or Wednesday.
Here in Missouri?
At NU. So we invited Ustadah Qadri, who is actually an attorney from the UK. And, he's written a text or a book called Heaven on Earth, and it surveys Sharia through history, and it's really actually more of a, it seems like a novel, because he starts kind of relaying stories and narratives of various people, and begins with the concept of the first man, and I forget his name, who wanted to actually, he suggested, I think this is in the 8th century, Common Era, where he suggested to have it written, and he was actually hung for that. Or
Muqaffa?
Yes, okay.
He wasn't hung for that. He was Ibn Muqaffa was executed in 756. He was executed. Because he was accused of heresy. He was a political operator. Probably was too smart for his own good, and he got in trouble with the dynasty. He was only in his 30s. I'm sad. But he wrote a book where he suggested that the caliph basically pick some position from the different schools of law and just implement that position.
So anyway, that's actually, I think, I haven't read it, I just got it. So I'm not, I can't guarantee that it will be what you're looking for, but that's definitely something you should look at.
Yeah, I heard him talking on the radio, and it sounds like a really good book. There's not a lot of good books on Sharia on Saturday, but this actually sounded like it would be useful.
And Muhammad Hashim Kamadi and his principles of Islamic law, I think that's kind of
Muhammad Hashim Kamali's Principles of Islamic Law, Wael Halak's book, Introduction to Islamic Law, that's okay. But I think actually it sounds to me, from what I stress, I have not read the book, but from what I heard from the author's interview, it actually sounds like this Heaven on Earth book is really a useful resource. And it sounds like it's the kind of thing that anybody could pick up and read and not have a tough time understanding.
Jazakumullah khairan. Can we give both our speakers a hand? Reverend Yusuf is going to come and direct us to where we can pray Maghrib and the next